and I'm in the meeting. Gasampa.
Yes, Councillor Benson-Kelly, I'm in the meeting, member.
And Simon.
Yes, I'm here, Councillor Simon Brown.
And we've just heard from AJ, so you must be here. Marilyn.
Yes, I'm Councillor Marilyn Ashton, and I'm definitely in the meeting.
And Christopher.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I'm a full member of the committee and I'm in the meeting.
And Jana.
Councillor Anjana Patel, I'm a member of this committee and I'm here.
Good. So that's all the members of the committee present. Could I ask the planning officers to introduce themselves?
Yes, Chair. I'm Beverly Kushar. I'm the Interim Chief Planning Officer. I'll be presenting one of the items. We have Orla Murphy, who's the Head of Development Management, Katie Parkins, Principal Officer, Selina Hotwani, Principal Officer, Nikki Rankin, Principal Officer, and Nabil Kazmani, Principal Officer, who will also be presenting items on the agenda this evening.
Right. Can we go through those? Orla, are you present?
Good evening, members. I'm present. Thank you.
And Katie.
Good evening, members. I'm present.
And Nicola.
Good evening, members. I'm present.
And Nabil.
Good evening, members. Yeah, I'm present.
Selina.
Good evening, members. I'm present.
Are there any other planning officers present? I think we've got the full complement. Is there somebody present from legal services?
Yes, Jimmy Walsh from Legal Services here, providing legal advice.
And the committee clerk.
Yes, my name is Mwim Chela, the committee clerk.
Okay, I think that's all the officers and members accounted for. If we move on to item 2, which is right of members to speak. I have a request from Councillor Greek to address us on item 201, which is 15 Elmer Drive. Is that agreed? I take that as agreed. Declarations of interest. I have one declaration of interest that's on item 207, and it's a pecuniary interest in that I have an association with the applicant. So I think that is the last item on the agenda, so I'll hand the chair over to the vice chair to do that item and any other business when we come to the end of the meeting. The minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of May 2020. Can they be agreed and signed as a correct record?
Yep.
Marilyn, did you wish to say something?
Yes, please, Chair. They're excellent minutes. Just a simple point. I see that we're recorded as having voted unanimously in certain cases, and in the case of the development that was refused, we're recorded those people who voted for and against. But in the body of the minutes, it says a member proposed refusal. Surely it should say which member, because it was me. I would like to be, I'd like it minuted that it was Councillor Marilyn Ashton who proposed refusal, if possible.
We've not usually done that in the past. People remain anonymous and they're either referred to as an officer or as a member.
Well, we are recorded at the end anyway, so I don't see any reason why not if I wanted it so.
Well, is there any guidance from the legal team or from Democratic Services?
I would have thought it's a matter of style in a way, and to be consistent. I believe it hasn't been done that way in the past. So I think it's really up to the committee. It's a bit like whether you record the votes, the way you record the votes individually or not individually. So it's done differently at all the different councils I've worked at. So it's a matter of style. The important thing that there was a proposal and seconder.
Well, I can't see any reason. Sorry.
We should record it, and I agree with Marilyn on that. We should record who's refused, and even if you can put
who's recorded, who's refused. But
yes.
I think the proposer of the refusal, having done that, that person should be named.
Mm.
And since it's me, I can't see what harm it can do.
We haven't done this in the past, and if we start changing things around now, we'll have to record every member who proposes or refuses, and we probably have to name each member. So I'm quite content that the minutes are correct. Shall we take a vote on it then? I vote to accept the minutes as they are. Kasantha?
I do the same.
Chairman, the minutes are correct.
Simon?
I'm just making a point. You don't need to take it to the vote. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. Leave it.
So yes, I accept the minutes, obviously.
All right, so that's at least 3. So the minutes are accepted and will be signed as a correct record when I can get near the hard copies. Item 5, public questions. We've got a question from Mr. Jolliffe. Is Mr. Jolliffe with us?
Yes, I am.
Would you like to ask your question?
If this question relates to the conduct of the pre-application meeting relating to one of the items, I think, for discussion later on.
Are you going to read the question out, or do you want me to read it?
Yes, could you read that, please?
Okay, the question is in relation to planning application in respect of 27 Redmond Road, a 2-storey side extension reference P/5698/18/pre-app. Does the Planning Committee agree that in accordance with Article 5.2 of the Council's own protocol, planning applications and lobbying, which forms part of its constitution, giving the potentially contentious nature of the matter based on the untypical proposals put forward for a 2-storey extension and the number of objectors already received from residents, at least 2 planning officers should have attended the pre-application meetings with the applicant or his agent, and that on the basis of the evidence provided, this was not done, and that therefore, in the interest of maintaining an ethic of impartial decision making, the planning application in question should be reviewed for compliance with all relevant codes of conduct and protocols. And if the pre-application meeting is found to have been conducted with a single planning officer present, that a new meeting should be held and documented with a second planning officer present, including the chief planning officer. And the response is that protocol in the Constitution is specifically in relation to members and reserve members of the Planning Committee and their involvement in planning applications. It is not a protocol for officers. In relation to this particular case, pre-application advice was given by way of a written response to the inquiry from the case officer and signed off by a senior officer. It did not involve a meeting and members were not involved, so there is no conflict with the protocol. Mr. Jolliffe, do you have a supplementary question?
No, I accept that answer. I will refer back to the protocol in case there's something I need to follow up on. I was not aware that it was just in the discussion with potential applicants.
Well, it's
related members. Sorry.
It's very unusual. I don't think it's ever happened that members would attend a pre-application meeting with applicants and with planning officers. So, but if you need any further clarification, please email me and let me know. Okay, we move on to item 6, petitions. None have been notified. Item 7, deputations. None have been notified. Item 8, references from council and other committees and panels. None have been notified. Item 9, there is an addendum that has been published. Are we happy to accept the addendum?
Yeah.
Yes, I'll take that as an acceptance of the addendum. Arrangement of the agenda. We have got representations on 3 applications. 201 15 Alma Drive will be taken first. Item 206 11 Adelaide Close will be taken second, and item 208 27 Redmond Rhodes will be taken third. Thereafter, we will follow in the order set out in the agenda. That's 101, 202, 203, 204, 205, and 207. We're not doing site visits, so there are no suggestions for site visits. Item 10, which is representation on planning applications. On item 201, we've got the objector, Mr. Maxwell Nissa, the applicant, Bhavish Patel, and as pointed out previously, Councillor Stephen Greek backbenching. Item 206, the objector, Mr. Robert DeBall, the applicant, Ang Kelly, and on item 208, the objector, Mr. Adrian Jolliffe, and the applicant, Mahmood Awan. Are we happy to receive those representations?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
I take that as a yes then. Okay. If we move on to item 10 and 11, planning applications received. For purposes of the people that are listening for this for the first time, there will be a short presentation by officers. We have had earlier in the week a very detailed briefing by officers on all of the planning applications. So I've asked for the applications when they are being presented to be presented very briefly. We then follow a period of questions from members of the committee to planning officers. The objectors and applicants will have 3 minutes each to address us, and backbenchers will have 5 minutes. After which we will discuss and consider the applications that have been received, and finally vote on the recommendations with the, I remind you, a roll call vote to confirm the members have heard all of the proceedings. So if we could move on to item 201, 15 Alma Drive. Who's presenting that?
That's me.
So that's Nicola.
Yeah.
Good.
Can members confirm they're able to see this when they're able to see the screen, please?
Yep. Yeah, that's okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
So members will note there is an addendum relating to this application in respect of minor amendments to condition 8 regarding surface water drainage, and an additional informative outlining the need for discharge of pre-commencement conditions. So the application relates to 15 Alma Drive, which is orientated northwest onto Alma Drive. To the east of the site, number 13 adjoins the application site, which is set on slightly higher ground level and is set forward of the subject property. To the west of the site is number 17 Alma Drive, which has been previously substantially extended and spans a width of approximately 29 metres. So the application proposes the replacement of the existing dwelling house on site with a 2-storey dwelling house and basement. This proposal is a resubmission of a previous planning application which was granted in July 2016. The principle of the development has been established by the previous planning permission, and there hasn't been any material changes in planning policy since that time which would warrant a different conclusion in officer's opinion. Here you can see the basement plan, ground floor plan and first floor plan, and the dotted line here indicates the outline of the existing dwelling house on site. The proposal would have a contemporary design. It is noted that a number of the properties along Alma Drive do exhibit a more traditional design and appearance, and nevertheless there isn't any particular uniformity along the street scene, and there hasn't been any material change in planning policy in respect of design and character issues, which would warrant a different conclusion from the previous acceptance of the character on this application. Furthermore, there is another contemporary dwelling in close proximity to the site, which was allowed on appeal at 33 Elmer Drive. In this case, the contemporary design approach is not considered to be unjustified. I'll just show you for comparative purposes. This was the approved scheme granted previously, and as you can see, it remains unchanged. So in conclusion, the proposal is considered to have an acceptable impact on the character and appearance of the area. It wouldn't have any detrimental impact in the residential amenities of either of the adjoining properties with respect to loss of light, overlooking or overshadowing, and is recommended for grant subject to conditions. Happy to take any questions, please.
Are there any questions? No.
No,
I don't
not the screen.
Don't see any questions being asked. Therefore, if we could bring in Maxwell Nisler, you have 3 minutes to voice your objections to this proposal.
Good evening, Councillor Ferry and members of the committee. Can you just confirm you can hear me loud and clear?
We can, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I refer to the application, and as you'll have seen from the objections I lodged on the 20th of January and 20th of March, I'm really asking you to turn the application down. I thank you very much, by the way, for allowing me this time, and I'm really addressing you as our elected representatives, who I believe are there nominated to act across the borough in accordance with best practice, approving applications according to best practice, the Harrow Plan and also the London Plan. And similarly, I also understand it's not a party political matter, it's more of a just what's good for the borough as a whole. I believe, although you've seen all my detailed objections, I believe there are 4 principal reasons why it should be turned down. First of all, I think the proposal is far too dense for the plot, and it's not in keeping with the surrounding houses. You can see that the plot is an extremely narrow plot compared to the adjoining plots and other plots indeed in this road. And you can also see that if you look at, although you may consider it a contemporary design, it is not in keeping. There are no garages, I believe, that are in sub-basements, and therefore driving down into a sub-basement is completely different than anything we've seen in the road. The second reason goes back to the basement, which I think is really a major matter. Normally I can understand basements, you might say, well, they're not a big deal. I would draw your attention to policy D9 of the London Plan, which I know I attached to my objections, which does specifically draw everyone's attention to the issues surrounding basements, and in particular flood risks and damages to adjoining properties. Now, you may say, well, if it's on level ground, then the water can drain away and everything could be fine, and what's my problem? This is not level ground. As the planning officer quite correctly pointed out, there is quite a steep hill here on Elmer Drive. In fact, if you don't have a four-wheel drive or a very good car with a front-wheel drive, you can't get up the road when it's snowy or icy. It's very steep. And therefore, the basement, I think, is going to cause major problems, because either the water will build up on one side of it and therefore flood adjoining gardens on number 13. Alternatively, it won't, because there'll be a slight incline in the basement design, and it will drain down through my garden, through other people's gardens, into Adelaide Close, which is at the bottom. And I really feel that this alone should be a fundamental reason why this planning application should be rejected. I would draw to your attention also, there are already drainage problems on Elmer Drive, with the drain outside number 9, which is a normal rainwater drain, consistently flooding a lot of the time. even when it hasn't been really raining very hard. The whole thing is a problem. I think it's also in breach of the Harrow plan for the reasons I've outlined in the 20th of January objection, and I won't go through those now because you've had the benefit of them. And last of all, I wanted to draw your attention, because of the steepness of the hill, and in fact, as indicated on the planning application itself, you can see that if someone walks along the top of the basement, there's even a picture of them, I believe, on the plan, which shows that a person can be walking and look over the wall that's proposed to be built, and therefore they can see into our patio at the back of our house, into our living room, and into our kitchen. And for these reasons, I feel we are overlooked and we will lose privacy. Members of the committee, I ask you to please take all of these points into consideration, along with my detailed objections, and reject this plan as it stands. I believe it should come back to you without a basement, and then I think it probably will have a more favourable approach. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nisner.
Nisner, by the way, N-I-S-N-E-R. Just pretend the S is a Z. It's easy to pronounce then. Nisner.
Nisner.
Got it.
Nisner, is that correct?
Yes,
Good.
Thank you very much.
Right, Mr. Bhavish Patel, is he online? I think we had him earlier. Is Mr. Patel with us? Okay, well, if we go on to Councillor Greek, who's backbenching on this item, perhaps we can find Mr. Patel after he's addressed us. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this evening. In my previous role as a nominated member, I had a lot of experience with this particular site and its various applications, and there are a number of concerns I wanted to raise this evening. I concur with the objections raised about density, ground levels, basements, flooding, drainage and amenity. I'm not planning to repeat all of them, but I did want to highlight and add a few points. First, I would say that the committee should not necessarily feel bound by the previous decision made over 4 years ago in different circumstances. Time limits are there for a reason and shouldn't just mean a new application gets rubber stamped. In any case, there are good planning reasons for the committee to take a fresh look and a different view. In particular on basements, a key concern here, as we've heard, there's a new policy in the draft London Plan 2019, which has significant weight as an emerging plan. Policy D10, it's D10 in the latest version, states that boroughs should address the negative impacts of large-scale basement development beneath existing buildings. Paragraph 3.10.2 then goes on to talk about the impact on structural stability and localised flooding or drainage issues, which is precisely the concern here. And paragraph 3.10.3 says the Mayor supports boroughs in restricting large-scale basement excavations under existing properties where this type of development is likely to cause unacceptable harm, which it certainly will here. Other very important issues here are surface water flooding, site levels, and amenity issues such as overlooking. But if you look at the reports, none of these have been resolved. They're all put into a long list of planning conditions. The same thing actually happened 4 years ago, and we actually have no more details now than we did then. This is very concerning, and it suggests the scheme has not actually been thought through. All of these issues will need proper scrutiny, but a pre-commencement condition really isn't the best way to do that with its time limits and restrictions. It just offers very little opportunity, certainly for the committee to look at it. Take flooding, for instance, a crucial issue here due to the surface water flood zone, and devastating if we get this wrong. We need to know now how it's going to be dealt with rather than rely on a planning condition. To be honest, I don't think the committee has nearly enough information to make a proper decision tonight. It has to demand more on basements, on surface water flooding, on site levels, and on privacy issues. Otherwise, it's impossible to impose this kind of development safely and responsibly on the local community. So I would urge the committee not to grant this application, ideally to refuse it due to the basement, flooding, amenity impacts and lack of information, or at least defer it until more information is produced on all these important issues. I know that committee members will want to look at this carefully, not necessarily on party lines, and I hope you make the correct decision this evening in the interest of all concerned. And thank you for listening to my submission.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Have we managed to reach Mr. Patel yet?
Not yet, Councillor Ferry.
No, and he wasn't on the conversation we had before the meeting started, was he?
No, he was on, but he disconnected. We're just trying to see if we can get him back on. If you could just give us 2 minutes, please.
Okay. Well, while you're trying to connect him, is there any discussion on this item? Do you want to discuss anything?
Chair, if I may just say a few words about some of the things that Councillor Greek has brought up in relation to policy D10 in particular.
Okay, Orla.
Would that be okay?
Yes.
So in Nicola's presentation, she mentioned that there have been no material changes in site circumstances or adopted policies for officers to warrant a different recommendation compared to the previous approval. Councillor Greek is right that policy D10 is a change in terms of the amendments to the London Plan. But when you look at the actual specifics of that particular policy, it refers to, I can read the basis of the actual policy. It says boroughs should establish policies in their development plans to address the negative impacts of large-scale basement development beneath existing buildings, where this is identified as an issue locally. So first and foremost, this proposal is for a redevelopment of the site. It's not for a basement structure beneath an existing building. The basement is integral to the development overall, and that's an important point to note. Secondly, policy 3.10, paragraph 3.10.2 refers to large-scale basement developments, i.e. those that are multi-storey and or those that extend significantly beyond the existing building footprint. Typically, the basis of this policy is aimed towards more inner London boroughs, particularly in terms of localised issues that we've all heard about in the press. For example, in Hammersmith and Fulham, Kensington and Chelsea are two examples of local authorities that have had local issues with basements in recent years. Going through the policy, paragraph 3.10.6. It says the Mayor considers that smaller scale basement excavations, where they are appropriately designed and constructed, can contribute to the efficient use of land and provide extra living space without the costs of moving house. In areas where basement developments could cause particular harm, boroughs can consider introducing Article 4 directions. And the paragraph above that refers to, there can be some issues regarding localised disturbance, for example. Noise and vibration, and that is recognised. We have added a planning condition at paragraph on page 74, which is condition 12, regarding a construction management strategy, which sets out the parameters that we would be seeking to ensure in regards to neighbouring amenity. The other points raised regarding flooding are recognised, and that's the reason why we have attached the pre-commencement conditions. And just drawing your attention back to the planning addendum, we have tightened up one of the conditions in particular, which is condition 8, regarding surface water attenuation. So our recommendation is to tighten that. And there are other conditions regarding the surface water disposal. So basically what the pre-commencement conditions require So it's the next level of design when a development is coming forward. It's not something at this pre-stage that a developer would typically do. So once the principle of the development has been agreed, the developer or the applicant would be required to go away, work up the construction details, engage a technical professional regarding the drainage matters, submit the information to us, and then we would then engage our drainage engineers and their expertise to ensure that the surface water discharge and flow rates off the site are in accordance with their requirements. So it's not simply a case of us saying as planning officers, that's fine. We do engage the relevant professionals within the council to ensure that all of the details are dealt with appropriately and in accordance with their recommendations, because clearly the drainage engineers in Harrow know what the drainage issues are locally, and we do rely on those officers to ensure that you know, that these conditions are dealt with appropriately.
Thank you, Orla. Have we reached Mr. Patel yet?
Sorry, Councillor Ferry, I'm just dialing him in now. He should be on in the next few seconds.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the Vodafone voicemail service for 07984643366.
Unfortunately, we can't reach him.
Okay, Marilyn, I believe you had something to say.
Yes, I do, Chair. It's a pity that the applicant wasn't able to address us. That's a shame because he has a right to. But there you go. That's the trouble with these virtual meetings. They don't always work properly. Chairman, I completely agree with everything that Mr. Neisner has. I don't think he's on anything. The problem is this, that we have very strong planning history on this, and I don't think that any policies have changed apart from the London policy on basin. I did take the liberty of, or the opportunity rather, of researching that policy. It really has large scale basements, and this is not, and it applies to existing buildings, and this is a redevelopment. And so, unfortunately, I don't really think that that policy, particularly if we were going to use it as a standalone policy, would be a strong enough case to warrant refusing the application. But that doesn't mean that, well, I can speak for myself, obviously, I'm happy about it, because had this come to the committee, which it should have done in the first place all those years ago, but unfortunately it was granted under delegated powers without reverting back to Councillor Greek, and ended up being granted without Councillor Greek taking the opportunity, as was his right as our nominated member, to call it in. And had it been called in, we shall never know what would have happened, but it may well have been refused, and with good reason. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. It was granted under delegated powers. And as you well know, Chair, one can't so easily revoke a permission once it's granted. There has to be some real reason why, and that wasn't a strong enough one. And I don't think a judicial review would have fixed it either. So we've ended up in a situation tonight where, and I'm very grateful to Councillor Greek for calling this in, whereby the objectors have at least had their opportunity, which they were robbed of before because of the council's failure to do their job properly and come back to the nominated member in a timely way. At least they've had the opportunity to tell us what they dislike about this application and why they would like us to refuse it. And as I said, and I'll say it again, I have absolutely no disagreement with one word of what has been said. The problem is that, you know, we have a job to do here and we have to be responsible. And if we're going to propose refusal, and as you know, Chair, I don't shirk away from proposing refusal. If I think we've got sustainable arguments, I'll do it. I just don't think that we would do very well if we propose refusal of this, because there's quite a lot of case history around consistency in terms of planning law. And when you have an application, it's lapsed, yes, but that has been granted and nothing really has changed. The area hasn't been put into a conservation area. We haven't changed our householders guide. There is really nothing to actually get our teeth into apart from one policy in the London plan that doesn't apply to this basement. When that is the case, it really leaves us with no wriggle room at all. What I am heartened to see, though, is that we are or have beefed up the pre-commencement conditions, which are actually a serious matter. And I have asked for a watching brief on those. And in the event that I am not satisfied that they are being discharged correctly by our drainage engineers who will assess them, I will call them in. And I have a right to do that, apparently. So it's very important that before this basement is constructed, and I'm not talking about building regulations here, I'm talking about planning conditions, that it is absolutely for sure that the water problems and flooding problems are dealt with correctly. Chairman, I am sorry about this. And as you well know, being on this committee is a little bit of a poison chalice, because as you know, this is in my ward and it's completely non-political, of course, but I probably ended up annoying the applicant and the objectors in one foul swoop, because I can't really say I'm happy to that this will almost certainly be granted, and nor can I say that I can do anything about it, and therefore I'm sure the objectors are going to be very disappointed in me. But I think they do understand that we are in a bit of a pickle with this now, and we shouldn't have ended up in a situation like this, but we have. So as long as those conditions are kept an eye on, and I will be watching them and making sure that they are discharged correctly, at the very least, we can rest assured that the construction of this development will go ahead and not do too much harm, or any harm, hopefully, to anyone.
Okay.
Chair, I hope that's clear.
Yes.
And thank you very much.
Thank you. Have we managed to reach Mr. Patel yet?
Unfortunately, we can't reach him, Councillor Ferry.
Okay, we'll continue without his input then. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak on this item? Okay then, if we can move to the vote. I vote to grant this application. It's Sampha, and I've heard all of the proceedings.
Yes, I have heard all the discussion and I vote to grant. Thank you.
Okay, Simon.
Councillor Simon Brown, I've heard all the proceedings and I vote to grant.
AJ.
Same here. I've heard all the proceedings and I wish the application for grant. So.
Marilyn.
Yes, Chair, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to abstain.
Okay, Christopher. Christopher, you're still on mute.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all of the discussion and I vote to abstain.
And Jana.
I've heard all the discussion and I abstain.
Okay, so item 20115 Alma Drive is granted with 4 members voting for and 3 abstentions. So can we now move on to the next item, which is item 206 11 Adelaide Close. page 217 of the agenda papers. Who's presenting this?
Chair, I will be presenting this.
Okay, so that's Beverly.
Beverly Crucial. So this application is in respect of two properties, 11 Adelaide Close and 5 Elmer Drive. The application was originally on the agenda for February committee, but was deferred due to a late representation for officers to consider that representation. The officers' report has been updated in the light of that representation and that reconsideration. Before you, you will see the garden building, the subject of this application. It's retrospective. It is a garden building containing a gym at the moment. Planning permission was refused for this building. Bear with me while I get the planning history before me. In 2018, the application has been resubmitted, and there are material differences in site circumstances and the circumstances of the application where officers have been asked to consider two things. Firstly, the scale of the building in relation to this application now being a building that will be used both by the occupants of 11 Adelaide Close and 5 Alma Drive. And the applicants have asked that we can, if minded to grant permission, that a condition is attached restricting the use of that building to those two properties. And the second key difference is that, as you will be aware, most houses have the benefit of permitted development rights, which allow outbuildings to be built within rear gardens. Up to 50% of the garden could be covered by outbuildings potentially, and there could be any number of outbuildings within both of the gardens, up to a maximum height of 4 metres. It is important to note that the applicant has also suggested attaching a condition which restricts those permitted development rights and therefore will allow the council to have future control over any further development of those gardens. These two facts are materially different from the situation the council was in when considering the application in 2018. If you look at the application itself and you look at the building itself, you will see that the building is before you on the photographs. You will notice from the layout of the plans that this is being used as a garden, gym and a games area, which is fairly common for a number of properties within the borough. And you will see from the plan before you the access to both gardens from the building. The other thing that I would ask members to consider is what could be built as permitted development. And I will refer you to the history, and in particular a certificate of lawfulness which was granted in 2015 for a slightly larger building than the one before you, 157 square metres, which if this building had not been erected could still be built as permitted development. I would also ask you to consider the fact that the height of this building at 2.5 metres measured against the highest adjacent ground level, which we are required to do, is a height of a building that will be accepted under permitted development. It is noted that there is a roof light within the building which takes the height above that, and therefore if this were attached to a single dwelling house, for that reason could not be permitted development, but the height on the boundary is. Officers have taken the opportunity to consider the relationship with the surrounding properties, and in particular the closest adjoining property, which is 14 Old Forge Close. The closest part of the rear of that property to this particular building is approximately 20 metres away. So the council, the officers have looked at the principle of development, and we have looked at the material differences in the conditions that have been suggested and the fact that the occupiers have been willing to accept these conditions, restricting both the use and any further outbuildings. And on balance, the impact on the character of the area and residential amenity is considered appropriate. The recommendation, therefore, is that the committee grants permission. I'd be happy to take any questions on this. Thank you.
Are there any questions to Beverly? I can't see anybody indicating that there's any questions. So if possible, can we hear from Robert Daboul?
Hello, Robert speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes, Robert. I've got a copy of your presentation, and it's very detailed, and thank you for that. But if you read the whole thing out, it would take probably about 10 or 12 minutes, and you only have 3 minutes allocated. So
I know,
with that
I've
in mind,
prepared a shorter version. So
goodness for that. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good evening, councillors and members of the committee. Following written representation, I am raising objections on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Daboul, who live at 14 Old Forge Close, which shares a boundary with 11 Adelaide Close and 5 Elmer Drive. Case law requires local authorities to take into account previous planning decisions as a material consideration. Where seeking to depart from a previous planning decision, the council must provide clear reasons for doing so. This is a second retrospective planning application for an identical structure already built and refused by Harrow on the 16th of October 2018 and not appealed by the applicant. No changes have been made to the bulk, scale and siting of the structure in the intervening period. Amongst the reasons for Harrow's refusal cited in the decision notice were the siting, excessive scale and height, visual bulk and unduly dominant, out of character and to the detriment of the visual amenities of the neighbouring properties, in particular 14 Old Forge Close. The planning policies have not changed since then. The outbuilding has not changed. Quoting from the 2018 delegated report, excessively bulky appearance, particularly when viewed from number 14 Old Forge Close. Wholly disproportionate and of a scale not suitable for ancillary domestic use. Such a large outbuilding would set an undesirable precedent for the area and is not to be supported. And these are Harrow's own words. There is also written correspondence from Harrow Council acknowledging, in relation to the 2018 application, that the issue relating to the intended use of the outbuilding by 5 Elmer Drive and 11 Adelaide Close was assessed as part of this application. So this cuts through the planning officer's analysis in respect to the present application. For indeed, there are no substantive differences between the applications. The same plans were attached to the 2018 application and did reflect the dual use of the structure by the residents of 5 Elmer Drive and 11 Adelaide Close. Permitted development rights do not apply to outbuildings that are incidental to multiple dwelling houses. So were the structure to be demolished, planning permission would be required for it to be rebuilt, regardless of any disapplication of permitted development rights. So to conclude, I would urge you to refuse this second retrospective planning application on the basis that nothing has changed, the detriment to 14 Old Forge Close has not changed, and the dual use of the structure has not changed. So to come to any other decision would be irrational. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Robert. Have we managed to reach Mr. Kelly, the applicant?
No, Chair. We have not been able to.
Right, we seem to be doing very well with objectors, but not very well with applicants, which is, I believe, the right way round, I think. So, if we can move on to comments by committee members, unless any officer wishes to give us any more information on the objector. No. Okay, then we'll go on to comments by members. We'll start off with Kasantha.
Thank you, Chair. Mike, really this comments also a bit of question that this gym is going to be used? Is it not going to be used by any friends, family friends coming around and using it other than 11 and 5? So I just would like to make sure that it's not misused and also not used later in the evening, not to disturb the neighbors. Thank you.
The condition restricts the use to be ancillary to the 2 properties named in the application. I think it would be impossible to say that if a friend came over and they were in the gym, similarly if a friend came to my house and we're in the garden, but the condition, I'll if you refer to the report, bear with me.
Page 229.
Page 229. It can only be occupied for purposes ancillary to the residential use of those 2 properties. It can't be used for any commercial purposes as a commercial gym, for example. So it is restricted to being ancillary to the use of those 2 properties.
Right, Marilyn.
Yeah.
Sorry, and December, is that right? You seem to have disappeared. You're on mute.
Ali, you're on mute.
Sorry, Beverly. Just to make sure that it's not to be used later in the evening, late night, to disturb the neighbors. Thank you.
It would be used as any ancillary building in the garden. It would be very difficult to restrict the hours of use of a garden building, and indeed would be unreasonable to do that. Bearing in mind buildings that can be built as permitted development, and bearing in mind it is a residential ancillary use, not a commercial use.
Okay, Marilyn.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, as it so happens, the fact that the applicant or applicants want to share this building to a certain extent is only relevant insofar as it needs planning permission for them to do that. And as our objector said, you cannot do that if it's permitted development, because that can only be ancillary to 1 building. I think, please forgive me, I'm not being disrespectful, but I do think that the planning officers and the legal advisors have got themselves a bit muddled on this. And I'm sorry, but I do actually genuinely think that. This is a planning application, and therefore it stands and falls as a planning application. And I said before tonight that consistency in planning law is a very important part of what we do, and good decision making is not well done when you are inconsistent. We just had an application in front of us which has clearly upset a lot of people, that was granted, and we couldn't refuse it because although it wasn't extant and it had expired, we already had established a principle. Now this is different, and it doesn't carry as much weight because the principle that was established here was that this local planning authority, not that long ago, in fact not as long ago as the previous application, which was granted 20 months ago or so, decided that this building was completely unacceptable, and nothing has changed since then. And I think that in terms of planning law, it seems to me that we are on very sticky ground if we then decide that we've changed our mind. And the reason we've given for changing our mind, to me, again, is muddled. Because the fact that we can build buildings under permitted development in the garden is not the point here. Because this needs to be shared, it has to have planning permission. In fact, in all respects, I don't understand why this is being recommended for refusal, for grant rather. I don't understand why, and therefore I am going to propose refusal. And I'd like to be recorded as having proposed refusal, if that's fair. And the reason for refusal is as follows. The outbuilding, by reason of its siting in relation to the neighbouring site boundaries and its excessive scale and height, gives rise to a visually bulky and unduly dominant structure, which is out of character with the pattern of development in the locality, to the detriment of the character and appearance of the area and visual amenities of the neighbouring occupiers, in particular 14 Old Forge Close. Contrary to the high quality design aspirations of the National Planning Policy Framework 2018, policies 7.4b and 7.6b of the London Plan 2016, policy D2 of the Draft London Plan 2019, core policy CS1B of the Harrow Core Strategy 2012, policy DM1 of the Harrow Development Management Policies Local Plan 2013, and the adopted supplementary planning document Residential Design Guide 2010. And Chairman, other than the addition of the policy, which didn't carry the weight it does now from the Draft London Plan, which I hope I've got correct, because I find the new emerging London Plan a little bit more difficult to digest, not so familiar with those policies. But other than that, that reason for refusal is exactly the same reason for refusal as was given last time, and because nothing has changed. Thank you, Chair. Do I have a seconder?
That's my job to ask for a seconder.
Never mind.
Are you seconded that, Angela?
I want to speak before I second.
Okay, carry on.
I just wanted to ask the officers, and I've been asked already, that nothing has changed as far as this application is concerned. And now they have changed of heart and has gone for a grant. Not only that, are the officers not actually conflicting their own opinion as far as the height is concerned under the permitted development and the application? So I want Beverly to come back again and explain about the height, because if this development has been there for such a long time, why did nothing happen? What happened to the enforcement at the time? Why nobody acted on this before and left it for this long? So I would like the officers to answer to my question, and especially about the height.
Beverly?
Chair, if I may share my screen again. Okay, so you'll see the height of the building here and its relationship with the adjoining boundaries. You'll see how it projects marginally above the fence. When you're measuring buildings, you measure the height to the closest adjacent, the highest adjacent ground level. In this case, the measurement here measures 2.5 meters to the highest adjacent ground level, and that's the height taken for the building. For permitted development, an outbuilding within 2 meters of the boundary, if it does not exceed that height, can be considered not requiring planning permission. As I explained, if it is connected to one single dwelling house, and I think that point has been made, that this isn't permitted development because it's in relation to two. As I explained in presentation, the building itself has a roof light, which you can see indicated there, which takes it, increases the height, and therefore the building as a whole, were it considered in relation to one house, because of that roof light, would not be permitted development. But the 2.5 meters indicated there and there is in accordance with the general permitted development order, were this in relation to one building. Thank you.
I don't get that. as far as I was, the question I was asking is that the whole building, is it in line with the height it should be? And we were already talking about it, that under the planning application, it has to be one so that both property can use it. Anyway, I would like to second to refuse this application. That's what I want to do.
Councillor Ferry, you're on mute.
Oh. Simon, you have your hand up.
I do. Whoops. Thank you, Chair. I do indeed. I find myself agreeing with Maren on this, although you need not record that in the minutes, of course. But the situation seems to me quite clear. In 622, we say there's no material changes proposed to the building since the refusal, and I don't really myself believe that the option of, in a sense, trading off permitted development rights and then allowing this development really stacks up against the original refusal. So for that reason, I will be supporting refusal of this application.
Okay. Does anybody else wish to add anything to the conversation? No. Beverly, would you like to say something?
I would just comment that the MPPF has been updated, so it would be, if members are minded to refuse, reference should be made to the 2019 MPPF, not 2018.
Sorry. Can that be amended, Beverly? I do apologise. My mistake.
Okay. All right. We're happy to move to the vote then. We have a motion for refusal. All those in favour of refusal? I'll go first. I'm not in favour of refusal. Isantha. You're on mute, Isantha.
Not funny, really, but I've got to laugh.
Councillor Ali.
Yeah.
Hello.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and proceedings, and I'm going to vote to refuse. Thank you.
And AJ?
Same as Gazalfor. I've heard all the proceedings and we've therefore refused.
Marilyn?
Yes, Chair, I've heard all of the discussion and I vote to refuse the application.
Christopher?
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all of the discussion and I vote to refuse.
And Jana?
Councillor Anjana Patel, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse the application.
Okay, so that application 20611 Adelaide.
May I vote, Chair?
Oh, sorry, Simon. I know which way, because you've already said which way you're going to vote. But
oh, okay.
Oh, no.
Councillor Simon Brown, I've listened to all the discussions and I vote to refuse the application.
Right. So 20611 Adelaide Close is refused, with 6 members voting to refuse and 1 against refusal. So we now move on to item 208, 27 Redmond Rhodes. It's on page 281 of the agenda documents. Who's going to present that? Nicola.
I'm presenting.
Good.
So this application relates to 27 Redmond Rhodes, which is a 2-storey detached dwelling house on a corner plot, the principal elevation fronting Radnor Avenue. The property is currently undergoing roof alterations, which have been granted under certificates of lawfulness. The application proposes a 1st floor side extension here. The extension would project 3 metres from the flank wall and would have a setback of 0.5 metres from the principal elevation, with a subordinate pitched roof. The proposal is considered to have an acceptable impact on the character and appearance of the street. There is a varied street scene. It would be consistent with the council's residential design guide, and with regard to residential amenity impact, the proposal is considered to be acceptable in relation to the number 25 Radnor Avenue here. It would comply with the 45-degree code and wouldn't result in any loss of light overshadowing to this property. There are no windows proposed in the rear elevation, and the windows on the flank wall are considered to have an acceptable impact on the property number 1 Radnor Avenue here, as there is a considerable distance between the two properties and no flank wall windows in the adjoining property. So the application is recommended for grant, subject to conditions relating to matching materials and regarding no installation of windows. Happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions to Nicola? No, I don't hear any. So is Adrian Jolliffe with us?
Yes, I'm here, Councillor.
Right, you have 3 minutes to voice your objections.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity. It's good to see local democracy in action, and I'm part of it. So thank you very much. I'm impressed with the way it's been set up. First time speaking to a planning committee. I'm speaking on behalf of 9 local residents, as you've heard. 9 objections have been raised, which has a strength of feeling with this development, which, if approved, will leave us with, we think, 2 problems. One, from the point of view of the Radnor Avenue aspect to this property, because as you've seen, it's on the corner of 2 roads. The proposed extension, which is a 2-storey extension, is overbearing, of excessive height, bulk and scale. From the Redmond Rhodes side, from the Redmond Road aspect, the proposed removal of chimney stacks and the roof design, including dormer windows, will totally unbalance the existing symmetry of the corner plots either side of Redmond Road. As you drive along Redmond Road, you reach a sort of kink in the road, and it's precisely at that point where there are 2 opposing corner plots, which in Victorian times, when it was built, were designed to be symmetrical. This proposed development would completely destroy that symmetry and destroy, therefore, we believe, the character and appearance of Radnor Road. The application should be considered also in the light of the fact this is the 10th planning application for this property since April 2018, beg your pardon. And so it's been a concerted effort to, bit by bit, chip away at any resistance to planning developments. We believe that the result is, when you take all the cumulative effect of these applications, would result in a massive overdevelopment. The other thing I wanted to, other point I wanted to raise on behalf of my fellow residents is a point raised by Councillor Ashton, the lack of consistency, because throughout the history of these planning applications, there have been various applications that have been rejected. One such refusal was in relation to a pitched roof on the outbuilding, which would have added 20 cubic meters of bulk to the roof itself, would have added 20 cubic meters of bulk to the outbuilding, and it was rejected on the basis that it would create an obtrusive and bulky addition to the street scene. And yet the side extension is 5 times that bulk and has been or is apparently proposed for approval. The other aspect I mentioned is about the complete lack of symmetry that would result in the approval of this development. The chimney stacks, as I say, are proposed to be removed. The roof design would be changed completely with a gable fronting Redmond Road. This is absolutely the opposite of the design of the building that used to be its twin, if you like, across the other side of Redmond Road. So as I say, that would completely unbalance the existing symmetry, and that was one of the reasons why reference P0047 -18, a previous amendment to the roof, was rejected by the planning officers due to, as I say, a lack of creating an unbalance to the existing symmetry on the corner plot either side of the Redmond Road. So we believe that throughout the history of these proposed development, there have been decisions taken rejecting the application for changes to the property that are now apparently reversed by this proposal to approve for to propose the development for approval.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Mahmood Awan.
Hello, good evening, respected members and council officers. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. We're grateful for the opportunity to voice our views on the application of the home for my family and my disabled brother. Firstly, I'd like to point out there also have been comments or support of the building that have been registered as a web comment. And this is actually probably the second planning application which we've applied for, and not the 10th. I'm a bit concerned with where one of my neighbours is getting his information from. Obviously, we have permitted development rights which we've built upon, and the outbuilding is a flat roof. I'd like to confirm that our application has been fully transparent and have engaged in meetings, pre-app meetings, and taken account of suggestions of acceptability and improvement of the proposed development within the application. We have provided all the information as required, as seen by the reference and drawing, to ensure that we are following the protocols and processes required, and that our application complies with national and local planning policy. I think it's important to note that this application is for the first floor application and alteration to the roof. Obviously, the neighbours are concerned with removal of chimneys and the gable roof and permitted development, so I'm not too sure why they're commenting on that on this current application. We have engaged and worked with planning officers to ensure our application meets the requirements, and that the card is no longer in the area. We believe the proposal will result in a very acceptable impact on amenities to neighbours, visual appearance on the The character of the area is for large houses on small plots, and the first floor extension does not increase the footprint of the development and is entirely within the character of the area. Our application has been reviewed fully by the Council's independent planning department and taking all the issues into account, included street scene. By way of background, this property will be...
Just a moment, Mahmood. Could everybody put themselves on mute? Marilyn, you're not on mute, and Anjana's not on mute.
Sorry.
Please do let me know.
Okay, carry on.
Thank you. By way of background, this property will be the home for a young adult of 28 years old, who is my brother. His name is Sumesh, and his family. We all live as one family together. He has severe learning disabilities, visual impairment, difficulty in mobility, and motor coordination and dexterity. The layout of the design is based on our endeavour to be able to provide and cater to the highly specialist support needs of Sumesh and maintain his family structure and dynamics, with the aim of promoting his independence, maintaining dignity, personal dignity, to achieve a better quality of life. This is to be supported with the aid of live-in carers going forward. Notably, Sumesh is registered disabled and...
If you could, Mahmood, if you could wind up now, you have a little bit more than 3 minutes.
Okay, he is severely, partially severely sighted, and the idea is to basically have a home for him, which is planning for his future and to keep his family environment intact. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. Are there any observations? Marilyn, you're still on. You're not muted, but never mind. I'm sure you're going to speak in a moment. Gasamfa.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at email came to me around about 5 o'clock. I'm sure everybody should have received it. Mr. Awan is mentioned regarding his brother, and then I'm also looking at objections. I think officers have responded it very clearly, and the objector, I think, was going on to technicalities. But nowadays, if you look at, I mean, where I live, my every second house is extended first floor because the families are not moving out, and with the families growing children, so everybody is having side extensions. And looking at the application, and as officers have responded all the objection, I think I will go for the grant. Thank you.
Hi, Marilyn.
Chairman, I mean, please forgive me. I know why this is before us. I think the officers called it in, didn't they? Because there's been a lot of objections. Is that right?
There's been a lot of public interest.
Public interest. I mean, unless I've misunderstood, this does comply with our policies. Perhaps one of the officers could answer, because I really honestly, I've gone over this with a fine tooth comb and I can't find anything wrong with it. That's the problem. Seriously.
Oh, okay.
I just want a confirmation that this doesn't in any way go against any of our householder guide policies or any other policies for that matter. I'm not talking about the outbuilding, which is a separate issue that was refused. I'm talking about this planning application.
If I may, Chair.
Thank you.
Paula, yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I can confirm that, as the report sets out, it has been assessed against our adopted development plan policies and supplementary planning document in respect of householder extensions, and it meets all of those guidelines and policies.
Thank you. That's really all I wanted to hear. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, we did receive an email later on in the afternoon from you, Mahmood. The second part of it, where you refer to your a young adult aged 28, Sumesh, I'm afraid, although it's very harsh, we can't take that into account when we're looking at the planning merits of the case, because eventually that particular person will move out and somebody else will move in. Okay, are we ready to go to the vote then? I'll start off. I've heard all of the conversations and I vote to grant the application.
Yes, Councillor Ghazanfar Ali, I heard all the discussion and proceedings, and I will vote to grant. Thank you.
Right. Simon.
Councillor Simon Brown, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Okay, and AJ?
Councillor Ajay Maru, I've heard all the discussions and hereby vote for grant. Yes, thank you.
Okay, and Marilyn?
I have heard all the discussion and I vote to grant. Thank you, Chair.
And Christopher?
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all of the discussion and I vote to grant.
and Anjana.
Councillor Anjana Patel, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Okay, so item 208, 27 Redmond Road is granted. I'm going to propose that we have a 5-minute break now so that people can fill up their glasses of water or whatever, and come back about come back just before. Don't switch your computer off, whatever you do.
Oh no.
Just leave it there and come back about just before 7:30. 101, known as Kilby's Industrial Estate, which we've seen before, and it's on page 21 of the agenda papers. Who's introducing that?
That will be me, Councillor Ferry, Nabil Kasmani. Can members all see the presentation?
Can, yes.
Okay, so this is application 101, which relates to Kilby's Industrial Estate and numbers 1 to 5 Bacon Lane. By way of addendum, there are additional comments from the biodiversity officer and also a related condition for biodiversity enhancement and mitigation relating to the site. The site itself relates to the former industrial yard, which consisted of B1, B2 lock-up garages and number 1 to 5 Bacon Lane that fronts the street there. The surrounding land use, as you can see on the left, is predominantly residential with a mix of terraced and semi-detached dwelling typologies. And the application site itself is identified as an allocated site for residential development within the Harrow site allocations SPD. Just some pictures of the site there. Members will be aware that planning permission was granted in 2018 for the redevelopment to provide 24 dwelling houses, and that's shown in the previously approved block plan on your left. On the right, we see the new proposed site block plan. At the detailed technical design stage prior to construction, it became apparent to the developer that they were not able to meet the relevant accessible housing standards requirements to meet building regulations. And as a result, they've had to increase the width of the dwelling houses. And in doing so, what's resulted is the loss of one dwelling house to accommodate the space. So the revised proposal seeks to provide 23 dwelling houses rather than the 24, which was previously approved by the council. And you will note the slight changes to the layout of the development and the way the terraces are lined. The design of the dwelling houses will be identical to that which were previously approved as to the massing and the form of the typology of the houses. So with regards to the principle of development, that was already established. I do want to remind members that the site itself is allocated within the Harrow's development plan for a residential use. With regards to housing mix and affordability, officers consider that the density and typology of housing is considered appropriate, and an affordable housing contribution is to be secured by way of a Section 106 agreement. Moving on to character, the massing and form of the proposed dwelling houses would be consistent with the scale of housing in the surrounding area, and officers consider that the proposal would conform to the principles of good design and would therefore be acceptable in this regard. The siting of the dwelling houses is broadly similar to that which was previously approved, and therefore the proposal would have an acceptable impact on the residential amenities of adjoining occupiers. Finally, in regards to parking, the proposal would provide one car parking space per dwelling house, and therefore a parking mix that was consistent, which was consistent with that which was previously approved on a one-to-one basis. And the council's highways department have raised no objection subject to conditions and relevant planning obligations. In moving to concluding the presentation, weighing up the development plan policies, proposals and other material considerations, officers consider that the development is worthy of support. Members are therefore requested to grant planning permission subject to planning obligations and the conditions detailed within the report. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Right. Are there any questions to the officer? Remember this back in 2018, we did a site visit to this site. And okay, are there any comments? No? Marilyn. Marilyn, you're on mute.
Am I unmuted now?
You are.
Oh, jolly good. As you know, Chair, I wasn't on the committee last time this came. What this goes to show is quite interesting is that in actual fact, even when something's approved, if it comes to light later on in terms of pre-commencement or other matters, that one can insist that you know, one can say that it's not capable of being built for other reasons. So it's rather good that it's come back and it's actually improved. The one thing I noticed about it that actually pleased me a lot was the fact that they're going to be putting in the electric charging points. And I think that's most welcome. I wish we'd do more of that. I just wanted to say that I thought this was quite a nice little development, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other comments? So shall we move straight to the vote? We're voting on recommendations A and B. I'll start off, and I've heard all of the conversations, and I vote to grant the application. Cassandra.
Yes, Councillor Ghazanfali, I've heard all the proceedings and discussion and vote to grant. Thank you.
Simon.
Councillor Simon Brown, I've heard all the discussions and proceedings and vote to grant.
AJ.
Councillor J. Maru, I've heard all the discussions and the proceedings and vote for grant. Thank you.
Marilyn.
Yes, Chair, I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant the application.
Christopher.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
And Jana.
Councillor Ranjana Patel, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant this proposal.
Okay, so item 101, Kilby's Industrial Estate, numbers 1 to 5 Bacon Lane, is granted unanimously. We move on to item 202, 35 to 69 Imperial Drive on page 97 of the agenda papers.
Good evening, members. Katie Parkins. I'll be presenting this item. If you just bear with me, I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see the presentation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. The application site relates to 35 to 69 Imperial Drive. It consists of 3 buildings, each are 3 stories in height and provides 6 flats. This is the existing front elevation. So the proposed development is the removal of the existing pitched roof and the construction of an additional floor on each building to provide a total of 6 flats. In addition, they are proposing a new porch to each building. The proposal would increase the housing stock in the borough and therefore the principle of the development is acceptable. The proposed upward extension would increase the height of the building by approximately ½ a metre, which is considered modest given the size and scale of the buildings. The extensions and porches are of an appropriate design and scale, which would be subservient to the existing buildings and would have an acceptable impact in terms of character and appearance. Given the siting of the buildings and their relationship with neighbouring properties, the proposal would not result in a detrimental impact to residential amenities. There is an existing car park which provides 15 parking spaces, and the agent has confirmed that the existing parking is controlled by the management agent. Residents need to obtain a parking permit and there is an enforcement company to prevent any unauthorised parking on site. The proposed development does include an additional 3 accessible parking spaces. The proposal complies with all the relevant planning policies and is therefore recommended for grant subject to conditions. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions to the officer? Cassandra.
Katie, just on the briefing, I raised a question of allocation of spaces. All these parking permits are granted on the basis of individual resident to be allocated, or I mean, anybody can park there who is living there. Because we don't want the residents arguing between each other.
So what I've been advised is that a resident has to apply to the management company for a permit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Any observations? Right.
Chairman, I think this is a lost opportunity to provide some much needed additional housing stock, because had this been a development of a kind of loft extension format whereby the windows would be as part of the roof, and I'm sort of referring to a sort of dormer windows. I think this could actually look quite nice, and I see that previously we have actually refused developments because of their design, and whereas I wouldn't like to speculate on precisely what that would have looked like. But I don't think that this kind of warehouse box that they've stuck on the top of this building looks at all inviting. It's most unattractive, and therefore, Chairman, I'm going to propose refusal. 2 reasons. Proposed development, due to its inappropriate design, represents an incongruous addition to the host building and would be out of keeping with the character and appearance of the original buildings, and would fail to respect the character surrounding neighbouring properties and pattern of development in the surrounding area, contrary to policies 7.4b, 7.6b of London Plan 2016, Policy D3 of the Draft London Plan 2019, Policy CS1B of the Harrow Core Strategy 2012, Policy DM1, the Harrow Management Policy 2013, and the adopted supplementary planning document Resident Design Guide 2010. And the second reason, the proposal, by reason of its siting in close proximity to neighbouring houses, would result in an overbearing development, resulting in unacceptable loss of outlook and visual amenity to the rare habitable rooms and rare gardens of the neighbouring occupiers, contrary to 7.6b of the London Plan and D2 of the Draft London Plan 2019 and DM1 of Development Management Policies 2013 and the adopted supplementary planning document Resident Design Guide 2010. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. If anybody didn't get it, it's all written down on page 103 of the agenda papers as the reasons for refusal for the application. The seconder, Anjana.
Before I second, I did put my hand up when I wanted to ask a question to the officer. This is completely out of character in that area, and we do insist that the development should be within the vicinity of or the character of that particular area. And this is definitely really out of character, and I'm sure Councillor Ghazanfar Ali will agree with me because he can see this day in, day out. The other thing is you didn't actually tell us the distance between this development and the gardens or the people's houses at the back where they will be overlooking, because I think that was also one of the reason that I think there were objections when this application first was there. So those are my 2 questions, that it is definitely not in line, and the development doesn't look nice at all on top of that particular 2-story building. It doesn't sit well at all. And I totally agree with my colleague saying that if it was a loft extension, it would be in line with the area and the properties in that area. But this is absolutely out of character. So I actually second the refusal of this particular proposal. Thank you.
Katie, do you want to come back with those questions?
Yes, so the properties, well, there's 2-story residential properties located to the rear. For example, the middle building is approximately 26 metres from the rear wall of those dwellings to the rear, and approximately 14 metres to their rear boundary.
the extension itself, it's no higher than the existing building, and the extension is set back from the rear walls of the existing building. So in terms of impact to residential amenity, we consider that the impact is no worse than the existing circumstances.
Disagree with you.
Marilyn?
Chairman, just to add that it's not the size, which is why the reasons for refusal are taken out to get words. It's the design. It is simply an unwelcome and unattractive addition to what is not a bad looking building. I don't think that any of us would object to additional apartments in the roof space, but this is not in the roof space. This is this kind of warehouse, this square box shoved on top of this building, and it's just incongruous. It doesn't look nice, and actually it doesn't have to be in a conservation area for us to say it's poor design. And this is poor design, and I don't think it should be granted. I think it will look awful. I think it's a pity, because more flats could be delivered and a welcome addition to our housing stock by using the existing roof space. Thank you.
And Jana?
Yeah, on top of that, the design is not even keeping with the brickwork. This building is completely different. It's an old style brick building, and you're building like a lump on the top. Now, this is absolutely out of character in this area, and I really urge my colleagues to really look at this carefully, to refuse it.
Okay. Are there any other comments? Samantha.
As Anjana said, that I go around. I mean, the present, the flats, they look all right. There's a small garden space around. But if you put another floor on that, which will definitely look different to the current design. And I think if it'll be like just putting like a container on top of a roof. And I think it won't look nice. I think it should go back and design. If they can change the design to put in the flat, then we can look into that, because I am against the design they're putting it, because it looks like a box on each building. So I'll recommend it that it should go back and they should change the design, at least keep it according to the current design, which will be looking nice with the current surrounding around. Thank you.
Okay. AJ?
Thank you, Chair. Would it be possible for Katie to just quickly go back to the picture that was actually posed to us? Can we have a second look at that, please?
Yes, sure. If you just bear with me.
Thank you.
Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, that drawing is also on page 122 of the agenda.
Yeah.
Want to say something, AJ?
No, that's fine. That's fine. And there's another one that was one after, which showed the finished. Was it the front?
No, not that. No.
That's the existing building.
Yeah. The finished one as been proposed.
The proposed elevation is on the top left.
Yeah. Okay.
Anybody else want to make a comment?
That's fine. Thanks, sir.
All right. So if we move to the vote, we have a motion to refuse the application. I'll go first. I've heard all of the discussions and I vote against the motion to refuse. Kasantha.
I heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse.
Simon?
Councillor Simon Brown, heard all the discussions. I vote against the motion to refuse.
AJ?
I've heard all the discussions and I vote to refuse.
Marilyn?
Yes, Chair, I've heard all of the discussions and I vote to refuse. And if I could be recorded as having proposed it, please.
Christopher?
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all of the discussion and I vote to refuse.
And Anjana?
I have Councillor Anjana Patel. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse.
So by
and
my
I second it as well. And I second the refusal.
Yes. So by my calculations, that's 4 votes to refuse and 3 votes not to refuse. So the application 202-35-69 Imperial Drive is refused. And we move on to 100 to 102 Headstone Road.
I will be presenting that case as well, so I'm just going to share my presentation with you. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Excellent. So the application site relates to 100 to 102 Headstone Road. An addendum has been issued which updated the planning history. So the site is a disused builder's yard in close proximity to the town centre. It has a PTAL rating of 6 and is therefore in a highly sustainable location. The proposal is to erect a 2-storey building to provide a HMO for 17 residents. It is noted that a similar scheme was granted in 2018, although the building contained 5 flats. The site is currently disused, but it is a relatively small site surrounded by residential properties. It is considered that the number of employees that could be associated with such a use would be relatively low, and therefore the loss of the builder's yard would not have a detrimental impact to the local economy. Policy DM30 of the DMP and Policy H9 of the Draft London Plan both support the provision of large HMOs. Policy H9 recognises that HMOs have an important role in meeting the local and strategic housing needs, and it even recommends authorities to protect those that are of a good standard. The principle of the proposed development is therefore acceptable. The proposed building, in terms of its height, scale and massing, was previously considered to be acceptable. There are some minor alterations to the roof form and windows. However, these are considered to be modest, and as such, the proposal would not have a detrimental impact to the character and appearance of the area and to residential amenities. The proposal would provide 12 rooms with communal facilities, including a kitchen on each floor and a communal garden. It's considered that the internal layout has been well designed and an acceptable standard of privacy and amenity would be created for future residents. It is noted that a HMO is subject to licensing, which is separate from planning legislation. However, the Environmental Health Department were consulted on this application and raised no objections. The development would be car-free, which would be secured by a Section 106 agreement. This would prevent future residents from obtaining a parking permit. Sufficient cycle parking is proposed and the Highways Department have raised no objection. The proposal complies with relevant planning policies and is recommended for grant subject to a Section 106 agreement and conditions. Are there any questions?
Any questions to the officer? No. Are there any comments? So can we move to the vote?
Yes, the comments is this site has been derelict for many years, being used at junkyard and flying tipping. I think it's a good time that somebody has come and develop it to provide accommodation for at least which we lack. Thank you.
Very much. So if we can move to the vote, then we're voting on recommendations A and recommendations B.
Chairman?
I've heard all. Sorry, Marilyn?
Yes. I have my hand up.
Right.
Can't move to the vote.
I did ask if there were any comments.
Yes. Put my hand up.
Okay, carry on.
Right. Chairman, it's a little bit of a puzzle to me. Why, if an HMO for 15 wasn't acceptable, why we seem to think 17 is. And I have to be honest, and I haven't got a problem with the building. I think the building is a nice building. But I do have a problem with the number of people that are expected to share the facilities there. I just think that it's going to cause, again, a lot of problems. And I'm not happy about it. And I'm going to propose refusal. The proposed development, by reason of the excessive number of occupiers it would accommodate, will represent an overly intensive use of the site and will provide a poor quality living arrangement for future occupiers and will cause excessive levels of disturbance to the detriment of the living conditions of future occupiers and the amenities of adjoining occupiers. The proposed development would therefore be contrary to the National Planning Framework 2019, Policy 7.6b of the London Plan, D1 and D6 of the Draft London Plan 2019, Policies DM1, DM30 and DM42 of the Harrow Development Management Policies, London Plan 2013. Chairman, I do hope that this will be carried because I honestly don't see how that number of people can share these facilities without significant antisocial behaviour problems.
Okay, do you have a seconder? Christopher? Anyone wish to add anything to the conversations? Anjana?
I just like to add that, I mean, obviously we all welcome more accommodation and more dwellings in this borough. We absolutely don't dispute that at all. But as far as the accommodation of this HMO is concerned, we don't really want this kind of, accommodation in this borough, which will lead to all kind of things in the future. So I think we are sitting here also talking about what kind of space people should have in this kind of accommodation. And I think that is quite serious, that we should be thinking of that. And I totally second what my colleague said, that it has to have more kitchen and other facilities. When 17 people are actually, living in one area, just think, even in your own house, if it's just 4 or 5 of you, how the facility affects you. These are people who are not even related, don't even know each other. So what are we doing? I'm sorry, maybe not planning issues, but I think it is an issue which the borough will have to eventually address in the future. And I think this is what needs to be looked at. Even when this proposal comes, we need to look at it very seriously. Thank you. I'm very emotional about this because as far as I'm concerned, this kind of accommodation, I'm absolutely disgusted that they all have to live in such a small area on their own without any privacy. Sorry.
Okay. Does anybody else wish to comment? Okay, we have a motion for refusal. I've heard all of the conversations and I vote against the motion for refusal. Kasantha?
Councillor Zanfali, I heard all the discussion and I vote against the refusal.
Simon?
Councillor Simon Brown, I've heard all the discussion and I vote against the motion to refuse.
AJ?
Councillor Ajay Maru, I've heard all the discussion and I vote against.
Marilyn?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion. I vote to refuse.
Christopher?
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all of the discussion and I vote to refuse.
Anjana?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse.
Okay, by my calculations, that's 4 against refusal and 3 for refusal. So if we then move on to granting the application, I've heard all of the discussions and I vote to grant the application. December.
Yes, so, thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant the application. Thank you.
Councillor Simon Brown, heard all the discussions and vote to grant the application.
Councillor
EJ.
Yep. Sorry, Chair, interrupting there. Councillor J. Maru, I've heard all the discussions and vote for grant. Thank you.
Okay, Marilyn.
Yes, I've heard all the discussion and I vote against granting.
And Christopher.
I've heard all the discussion and I vote against.
And Anjana.
I've heard all the discussion and I refuse this application.
Okay, that's by my calculations, 4 people voted for granting and 3 voted against granting. So application 2/03-100 Headstone Road is granted. Move on to item 204, 91 to 93 High Street.
That's me again, Chair, and the book's money. I'll just get the presentation up.
It's on page 157.
So the application site comprises a single-storey building which is attached to the rear of number 191 High Street. This used to be a print works, but was since converted to 4 self-contained units under prior approval. Number 91 High Street has a commercial use on the ground floor. The application site is within the Edgware Town Centre and is also in the setting of the Edgware Town Centre Conservation Area and within the setting of Grade 2 listed buildings that front the High Street. These are some pictures of the site, and the picture at the bottom left here shows the existing accommodation, which is the lawful residential use of the site. So the proposed use would be commensurate with the existing residential use and would provide a much better standard of accommodation for the future occupiers. What's being proposed is 4 one-bed terraced dwelling houses. With regards to character, the layout, form, appearance and design of the proposed dwelling houses are considered to be appropriate and would positively enhance the character and appearance of the locality. No objections have been raised from the council's conservation officer to the scheme. With regards to amenity, the proposal would have an acceptable impact on the amenities of adjoining occupiers within the context of the development site. And finally, as the application is within PTAL 6A, it benefits from an excellent accessibility to sustainable transport modes, and therefore highways support the car-free nature of the proposed development coming forward. So weighing up the development plan policies and proposals and other material considerations, officers consider that the proposal is worthy of support. Members are therefore requested to grant planning permission subject to conditions detailed within the report. Thank you.
Are there any questions? I don't see anybody putting their hands up. So are there any comments or observations? Jana.
I just would like to say that this is a lovely development and design which actually sits very well into the area, and I actually quite like this particular development. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? We move to the vote then. I've heard all of the conversations, and I vote to grant the application. December.
Councillor Ghazenfar Ali, I have heard all the discussion and I vote to grant the application. Thank you.
Councillor Simon Brown, I've heard all the discussions and vote to grant.
AJ.
Councillor J. Maru, I've heard all the discussions and here confirmed. Thank you.
Marilyn.
Yes, Chair. I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant the application.
Christopher.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
And then Jana.
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Right, that's unanimous, and item 204, 91 to 93 High Street is granted. We move on to item 205, which is 180 to 188 Northolt Road.
I will be presenting that. I'm just going to share my screen.
Page 183, and Selina is presenting it.
Can you all confirm that you can see the presentation?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
you can now.
Brilliant. The property is on the northwestern side of Northolt Road. The block has recently been converted to create 28 flats on the ground, first and second and third floors. The site has an existing part undercroft, part surface car park at the rear of the building, accommodating 16 spaces. The proposal seeks to create a fourth and fifth floor level of residential accommodation to provide 8 units with private outdoor balconies. No objections were received on this application. The property was recently converted into residential units under the prior approval process, and an additional story of accommodation comprising 4 flats has already been granted permission. The principle of an additional 4 flats to what was previously approved is therefore acceptable. In terms of character and appearance, the design is considered acceptable as it would replicate what was previously approved, and the additional height is similar to additions to buildings in the vicinity. In terms of amenity, the proposal is wholly contained within the existing roof and considered to have appropriate setbacks and sufficiently distanced from neighbouring properties. Highways have no objection to the car-free scheme or loss of 1 car parking space given the high PTAL location, subject to car parking permit restrictions secured by way of legal agreement. The committee is therefore minded to approve the application subject to conditions and legal agreements set out in the officer's report. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah. Anybody got any questions? I can't see everybody, so I haven't heard anybody shout. Are there any comments to be made? No. Then we can move to the vote. I've heard all of the conversations and I vote to grant the application. Kasamfa.
Councillor Ali, I have heard all the proceedings and vote to grant. Thank you.
Simon.
Councillor Simon Brown, I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant.
AJ.
Councillor J. Morrow, I've heard all the discussions and vote to grant. Thank you.
And Marilyn.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussions. I vote to grant.
Christopher.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
And Anjana.
Thank you. I have heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Okay, so in my reckoning, that is unanimous. So item 205, 180 to 188 Northolt Road is granted. And we move on to item 207. I have declared an interest in this item, so I shall leave the meeting, hand over to the Vice Chair, Councillor Ali, to do item 207 and any other urgent business. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'll take over now. Officers, who's going to?
Yes,
Selina again, is it?
Yes, I will be presenting.
Okay, all right, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen with you. Are you able to view the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. So an addendum in respect of this application was added in respect of an informative, which reminds the applicant to apply for and adhere to requirements under HMO licensing separate from planning permission. I'd also like to provide a clarification to the HMO licensing requirement for kitchen and dining area, which is stated as 133 square meters. It's actually 33 square meters. The application site is located on the northern side of College Road and was originally occupied by a 4-storey building. The pre-existing building has been converted to residential use. More recently, permission was granted for a third floor extension and additional storey of accommodation to provide 11 HMO units, which is currently being implemented. The proposal seeks planning permission for an upward extension to extend the existing third floor and create 2 new storeys to create a total of 19 HMOs and communal kitchen and dining space. The already implemented residential use of the original building would not be altered. The proposal complies with policy DN30 of the Development Management Policies document, which supports the provision of large houses in multiple occupation. Furthermore, the principle of HMO accommodation at this site has already been established, and therefore a further 8 HMO units to what has already been approved is acceptable. In terms of the proposed height, it is reasonable for the town centre, and there have been other permissions in the vicinity for additions to buildings with a similar height. The 4th and 5th floor would be set back from the front to minimise bulk and visual impact. For future occupiers, the layout and details are acceptable and would be subject to separate HMO licensing requirements. It should be noted, however, that the size of the shared facilities exceed that of the licensing requirements. In terms of neighbouring occupiers or residential premises, the impacts are acceptable given the relative distance between those properties, which would be sufficiently set far away to mitigate impacts. This is a car-free proposal, although the proposal seeks the provision of 2 blue badge bays and would result in a net of a parking space. Highways support the car-free intention subject to legal agreement to restrict parking permits. Committee members are minded to approve the application subject to legal agreement to restrict parking permits and subject to the conditions outlined in the report. I'm happy to take questions.
Any questions? Can you go back onto the screen, please, now?
Yeah, I'm sorry, my computer is not allowing me to sign out. Okay.
Yep, yep. Did it.
Colleagues, any questions? Yes, Anjana?
You're muted.
You're muted, Anjana. Can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry. Thank you. I personally feel that this particular adding another floor and to increase the HMO, but not increasing the facility on that particular floor as far as the kitchen and the other area is concerned. I think that is a bit of a concern for me because the 2 floors, I understand, will have to share the kitchen. The top floor will have to come a floor down and share the kitchen and facilities which is there. So I personally feel that if I had to, I would have asked to look at this application again, but I think Marilyn's got her hand up.
Marilyn, yes?
Yes, I mean, it's not a question, it's just an observation, really. I mean, look, we are where we are. We already have permission for 11, so, you know, this is all right, 8 more occupants, it's more, but the principle's been established, so, you know, we accept that. But I, again, think there's slightly muddled thinking here around the fact that licensing stipulates certain bases and certain facilities for communal use and in respect, in this case, of the kitchen. And I don't think that's the point. I think that this is a planning committee, this is a planning application, and we must judge it as a planning application. And we're not duplicating licensing. Licensing sits beside this in a different way. But we need to know what exactly people are going to have to live with when they eventually move in here. And the fact that the kitchen is 33 square meters, which is huge, doesn't fill me with great enthusiasm, because it still means that 19 people will have to use 1 room and 1 kitchen. And I don't think that's a very good idea at all. I think it's a recipe for real problems between people. And what I would like to see is that that when this is, granted, that the officers, I'd like to defer it and have it back, and I doubt whether I'm going to get anywhere with that. But I'd like to see that the applicant must divide this large space and make it into 2 entirely separate kitchens, so that one lot of people are just over half and under half of the 19 extra people can have a separate facility that they can use. I think it's very important. I really don't think it's a good idea. It doesn't matter how big the room is, for 19 people to use one kitchen. I can just picture the scene. You'll have people there that are vegetarian and other people are eating meat. You'll have people there who are Muslim and people cooking bacon. You'll have all sorts of problems with drinking, and this is what happens. And at least if you separate into 2 separate kitchens, you're reducing down the number of conflicts that there could be, because there will be less people in that space. So I really think that we need to ask the applicant. I'm happy to vote to grant this, but we need to ask the applicant if they would agree to subdivide that space and make it into 2 separate kitchens. And if that can be done, then I would be satisfied with this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Marilyn. Selina, I got one question. These units are to what extent they are self-contained, like unit, they got their own shower, a bathroom, or a small kitchenette in there?
Yes, so each of them have an ensuite and they have a small kitchenette as well.
Good. And my comments are also because there's a lot of students, who just all the time seeking the accommodation. This site, quite near to Harrow on the Hill Station, and also the local Westminster University, like Wembley. If you pass through the station, there's like many buildings are being built for the students' purposes. So I think, this kind of accommodation we need for the single people who are studying here, so can live here like a university campus. And also we got some visitors coming around. So I think, this kind of accommodation we need in Harrow, particularly near the station surrounding areas. Thank you. Anjana, and then I'll come to Beverly.
I take what you say now that you are a chair, but this accommodation, are they affordable for the students is a question I would ask. Are these affordable, units that we are building here in Harrow? Yeah. That is a question one needs to ask. If it's for students, it's a different thing. But this is definitely not built for an ordinary people. I can see that already.
Oh, thanks. Ajay?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question to Selina. Is this the concept of a co-living kind of style of accommodation, or what is this exactly? Because I'm just trying to get it a bit more clearer, please.
No, it's different from co-living. There are in these units there are kind of more single occupancy with less shared facilities, although you can have en suites, whereas co-living is primarily shared facilities and a high quality. In fact, you have more communal areas. It's for living in an environment with more shared facilities, I would say, larger kitchens, games rooms, that kind of thing. Whereas this is
targeted at professionals.
Yeah, it's targeted at a different user group, and it is slightly different.
Okay, so yeah, so the answer is no. So
Beverly, can you hear your feedback on that?
Yes, Chair. 2 things. Firstly, on the co-living. Co-living is within the London Plan. It's policy within the London Plan, and it's targeted at a much larger amount of accommodation than we're seeing before. Typically, you'd have more than 50 units within there, which is why the London Plan insists on having a wide range of supporting facilities that you wouldn't normally expect for a smaller HMO. So there's a clear difference there. What I did want to say, Councillor Ashton, is we could, if members were minded to grant and minded to add a condition, we could ask for a revised layout to be submitted in relation to those kitchens as a condition. We can ask the question, or we can put that condition on, if that would assist you.
It would assist me. Yes, thank you. Yes.
Can we go for Beverly's proposal condition and just grant it subject to that condition, please?
Yes.
Everybody agree?
No.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go around. And
So can I just take a vote now?
we've heard the discussion. Haven't we got to do that rigmarole?
Say it again.
I think we've got to do the rigmarole of we've heard the discussion.
We've
Yeah,
heard.
okay.
Hold on.
Okay, Beverly, so if you can add the condition and then we'll just vote to grant. I would have heard all the discussion and vote to grant subject to the condition. Thank you.
Councillor Simon Brown, heard the discussions, vote to grant.
Councillor Ajay Maru, heard all the discussions, vote to grant subject to the conditions as proposed by Beverly. Thank you.
Christopher?
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all the discussion and subject to that condition, I vote to grant.
Marlene?
Yes, I've heard all the discussion and subject to the condition that Beverly suggested and that I also suggested, I vote to grant.
And Jenna?
Yes, I've heard all the discussion and I agree to grant subject to the condition Councillor Ashton and Beverly has suggested. Thank you.
So everybody has to grant subject to the condition. So any other urgent business? Officers? Nothing? Nope. So thank you very much. Have a good evening and
thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. See you in July again.
Yeah, bye.
Bye. Bye.